office is closed and the bar is open. Welcome to Southern Law After Hours. Last time we talked about the Manson case, you don't mind, do you? It just came off a string of two big victories for Manson. A lot of bombshell declarations filed on his behalf, and then an order by the court to hear his request for limited discovery ahead of schedule before the anti-SLAPP motions are heard. So, good news for Manson. You probably wouldn't be surprised to learn this story is not going to stay one-sided. The defense has some things to say on its side. We're going to go over some breaking, maybe bombshell documents tonight that you may see from the defense later along with some other things, but we'll get to see them before they're filed in this case. Now, revisiting what's happened with Manson, he had his attorneys submit to the court several declarations to support their arguments for limited discovery ahead of the anti-SLAPP motion. Declarations from an attorney who spoke with the FBI agent who said I had nothing to do with this fake letter. A declaration from Manson himself. But I think the one that had the most impact, or did to me, was the declaration of Ilma Gore's sister, Bryton Gore, who, their twin sister, comes to court on behalf of Manson and throws down some facts that support Manson's case. We're going to be taking a closer look at this declaration and why there's perhaps more to it than originally meets the eye. If you've ever watched pro wrestling, you've certainly seen more than one match that goes like this. One giant roided wrestler pile drives the other one into the canvas. The guy's down. All he's got to do is lay on him, let the ref count him out, and the victory's in the books. But instead, with his opponent completely defeated, the roid monster stands up and starts gesturing to the crowd, celebrating his victory. That's all he wants to do. There's yelling and screaming, and the crowd's looking at him. But then the crowd notices something else. The lifeless body on the canvas, is it moving? Is this guy, is he? He's breathing. Is that his arm? And slowly, the defeated adversary begins to raise his arm up. Just slowly. And the crowd starts to scream at the guy who won. What are you doing? You got to finish this guy. He's coming back to life. Oh my God. But he's oblivious, right? He keeps gesticulating to the crowd, celebrating his victory. Nothing's going to steal his joy. Meanwhile, behind him, and he won't look. He won't turn around, but the crowd can see it. The guy on the canvas gets up and finally his finger comes up. He's back in the game. He's taking the energy from the crowd. He gets up to one knee. Still, his opponent, certain of his victory, will not turn around. Then, of course, the guy who previously was defeated jumps up to his feet, grabs the other guy, slams him backwards onto the mat, lays on him till the count of three, and it's all over. And everybody's like, how in the hell could this guy have blown this match? All he had to do was lay on him. It's entertainment at its finest, but it's also a mental weakness that we all suffer from, which is once we think we know how things are going, we don't want to consider anything else. And you've got to, in legal cases and probably other things in life, always fight against that tendency that your own narrative or the narrative you've adopted, that you accept in evidence uncritically and you disregard evidence that may be of the same quality simply because it doesn't match what you already think. And this declaration of Bryton Gore, I've seen a lot of that. I've seen people say, well, thank God she stood up for the truth. Well, first of all, how do you know what she's saying is true? You don't know her, and you don't know her sister. You are saying that because you support the things that she's saying. That's why you're saying it. It is some evidence for Manson. I think it's great lawyering, and maybe, in fact, it is all the truth. But that's not a thing that we know. All we can do is look at the credibility of the people involved in it, from Manson to Wood to Ilma Gore to her sister to the other people who declared, and balance which one is worth the trust or not. You can't be certain any one of them is telling the truth or even the truth as they think it is. You just don't know those things. You constantly have to assess credibility. And because this was her twin sister, it was a big credibility buster for the defendant, Ilma Gore and Wood, because it's not normal for a sibling to come forward and take a stance in a case. And I think a lot of reaction to that is, well, it just only can be because she wants to get the truth out there. She's brave enough to stand for the truth. That could be true, but what I'm going to show you suggests this is a lot more complicated than it appears on its face. So the Bryton Gore declaration had a lot of facts in it that seemed to me very relevant to this case. She observed her sister talking to Wood about this fake law enforcement letter, modifying it, sending it to her. She received an iPad from her sister, she says, that she used credentials that Ilma Gore had given her, and that's a sisterly thing to do, to log into this laptop. And then she saw the distressing things that she did see: a copy of this fake letter, text images from Wood to her sister and back about this letter, things about Manson that were personal that really had no business being on that iPad, things about her own social media accounts, email accounts that she says her sister had sent things under those accounts or posted things under those accounts that she didn't know anything about. So a pattern of bad behavior that she sees on this iPad that she has, and that's coupled with that she had previously seen her sister working on this fake law enforcement letter, and then also talking to Wood later, who said, hey, your sister told me you were deceased. And then when she brought up this fake letter, Wood allegedly says, yeah, don't tell anybody about that. It's important in what I'm doing against Manson and also for all victims. That's pretty good stuff to have on your side for the case. Now remember, at this stage of the case, it's not on Manson's attorneys to prove their case, and it is not on Wood and Gore's attorneys to disprove it. The stance is they're at a motion stage looking for discovery, the ability to take depositions of the defendants and a few other people, and they want to try and get past the anti-SLAPP motions, which basically say that for the protected items that the defendants are seeking to have struck from the lawsuit, that Manson has to show the court, I've got evidence on all of these elements, Your Honor. It's not that we're sitting here weighing the evidence like we're a jury. I believe this person over that person. Just, I've got this evidence, okay, that likely can be put into trial that does support what I have, and I'll have more later. If you can't come up with any evidence for some of the elements, there's a good chance the anti-SLAPP motions would be granted. And so that's why Manson's attorneys are saying, we have a lot of evidence, Your Honor, and we could get more that would show you that this case deserves to go forward if you just gave us a little bit of discovery. But people don't think about the case like that, and I'm not saying they should. They think of it like, who's right and who's wrong. Procedure is one thing. Eventually this gets in front of a jury and all the facts come out. How does it look? Well, by posting the declarations that were posted, Manson scored a lot of points in the court of public opinion, I think. Certainly did with me by this sister's declaration, among the other ones. It looked pretty powerful, and it is pretty powerful. But there are countervailing facts. Now let's start to get into those. So let's go back to one of the first allegations here. Is back in April to May, Ilma and Bryton were together, so that would have been in Australia. Ilma had an iPad that was another member of the family's iPad, and ended up in a call with Wood. And allegedly Wood was concerned about this letter, this quote-unquote FBI letter, that there was something wrong with it, Bryton says. And the call seemed tense. Ilma gets on the iPad, and she opens up some kind of editing program, and she's moving a signature from one item to a letter that appears to be a law enforcement letter, and then sends it back to Wood. Okay, so on the face of it, you might say, well, okay, there they go. They're creating this letter. But this is a little strange here. Your antenna can go up, because the letter that we've all seen, I think, at least I've only seen the one, was submitted by Wood in the fight with her husband over their child custody arrangements back in December of 2020. So the letter existed prior to that. And then later on in the declaration, in Bryton's declaration, she talks about seeing this screenshot from December of 2020 referencing a conversation or a text exchange in November about the potential text of this letter. And of course, we know this letter was presented in the custody dispute, and that occurred in 2020. So what are they doing in April or May of 2021 talking about there's something wrong with the letter and putting a signature on it, when the only signature we've seen is the one that existed on the letter that was presented to the court in 2020. So I'm not sure what's up with this time frame. It doesn't really make any sense, but that's okay. We'll move on from that. But again, it doesn't really support the timeline of fabrication of this letter, which this letter clearly is not what people purported it to be. So Ilma and Bryton end up in the United States, and they're living with family members. First Bryton is, and then Ilma comes into the picture. And so for a period of time they live together. And according to Bryton, Ilma gives her this broken iPad. The screen is shattered, so she doesn't use it anymore. She still uses this iPad that belongs to another family member. And she says, according to Bryton, you can have this for you and the kids. Okay, congratulations, you have a shattered iPad. But this is important because Bryton says this was a gift to me. And because of that, it makes it okay that she's logging on to this thing later. And maybe it was a gift. And maybe it wasn't a gift. But she says it was a gift. That's not much of one. And eventually she's able to get it to operate. So she says in October and November of last year, her sister's gone and she wants to get this iPad up and running. Not fix the screen, that would cost a lot, and that I'm sure is true, but let's get it running. So she brings it back to life with a special charger, and she uses Ilma's credentials to log into it. That Ilma had shared her login credentials previously to iCloud and allowed her to get onto Ilma's Apple devices. I think this is material because you're going to hear about Bryton's story that Ilma was a control freak over Bryton. It's a strange thing to share the credentials of the devices you're using to commit fraud with the person that you're defrauding. Don't you think? Isn't that a little strange? Ilma would say, here's all my login information so that if any point you want to get on this iPad I gave you, you'll be able to instantly see that I've been secretly trying to defraud you. It could be true. Not every criminal is a mastermind, but I wonder. Especially coupled with the fact that this declaration by Bryton lays this out, that she's shocked and horrified by what she sees. She's been a good sister. She can't believe this stuff. She talks to Wood on the phone, and Wood says, I thought you were dead. And then, of course, that's when Wood allegedly says, don't tell anybody about this fake letter. And the declaration kind of ends at that point. And the declaration was filed in July, mid-July of this year. So there's this open space between this November time frame of the discovery of what's on the iPad to when this declaration is filed. And I think it's pretty material that what was omitted in that is that Bryton went on a legal maneuver to get a restraining order against Ilma. And the proceedings that followed from that, and the things that happened in that, none of that is mentioned in here. And in those documents, you're going to see that Bryton makes a lot of allegations against Ilma, and that she chased her kids around with a chainsaw, that she was destroying things through the house. Why isn't any of that in here? That she's done so many things against Bryton and another member of the family that they're preparing their own civil lawsuit against Ilma Gore. There's none of that's in here. It's not in here as well that Ilma Gore was able to defend that restraining order on the basis of several witness statements of people who knew both of them that showed their own testimony that Bryton has her own credibility problems. And at the end of that case, which occurred in June, it was dispositioned by the court. I have pretty good evidence to believe it was dismissed and that Bryton Gore lost her application to have that continued on the basis of what the judge saw. Now, none of that necessarily concludes what you should think, but nevertheless, if you take this at face value, then you need to examine some of the things that could play into why some of this information missing and what are the motives for why a sister might make a declaration against the other sister. So in her application for the restraining order, Bryton Gore said a lot of things about her sister, which are certainly disturbing. That she says she chased Bryton's children around with a chainsaw, that she would destroy objects around the house when the kids were there, tell the kids that your mother is terrible, stuff like that. She says that Ilma Gore used coercive control against her, played mind games against her to exercise control over her, tried to coerce her to commit suicide, logged on to her digital accounts and stalked her that way. That this was all said in November. And she goes pretty hard to the hoop against Ilma in this application. She wants her forbidden from contacting her in any way or being around her or being around her kids. She wants permission to be able to record conversations that she might have with Ilma. And she wants Ilma to be ordered to attend a 52-week program for batterers and report on the completion of that to the court. Now, again, you start off with these are all terrible allegations. It's horrible stuff. But the end of this, from what I can see, is this thing is chucked out of court months later, before this declaration is filed. So you have this domestic violence situation that ultimately is unsuccessful for Bryton. And then you have this declaration filed. So what happened on this domestic violence order that could be relevant to the credibility and utility of Bryton Gore's declaration for understanding this case. Let's take a look at that. I weigh this against the declaration Bryton Gore made on behalf of Manson, where she simply says that the living situation was untenable with Ilma and that Ilma moved out. It doesn't go more than that. So she's telling the court for the domestic violence restraining order about all these things that Ilma Gore does, which are, if they were true or are true, are pretty terrible. But it strikes me that she's talking about how she's on my accounts, she logs into my profiles, but really the basis for her declaration is that she used Ilma's social media credentials, her Apple iCloud stuff, to get into this iPad. So that's a two-way street. It'll be interesting to see what Ilma Gore has to say about whether this really was a gift and whether her sister had permission to use the credentials that she had, because if that's true, they were both getting on each other's social media stuff. They both could. And it strikes me that if Ilma Gore were, I don't think either one of them are stupid, they're both smart, that if Ilma Gore wanted to exercise all this control over the digital life of her sister, why would she give her the keys to her own digital life, which not only could allow the sister to do the same things to her, but also would expose what she was doing? I mean, that's what Bryton says happened. Hey, I logged onto this iPad because, of course, Ilma had given me her login credentials, and imagine how shocked I was when I saw these things. Now, it could be true, but to me it is inconsistent with the theory that Ilma was exercising this level of control over her sister's electronic life if she had given these keys to the kingdom to her sister, doesn't it? So as this typically works, there's a restraining order granted, and then the parties can dispute over that as things go by, and they did. Ilma Gore contested this situation. In the end, she had an attorney who ended up presenting several declarations from witnesses on her behalf. And some of them were people who testified to the general character of Ilma Gore. Hey, I've known her. She's a good person. She does this that's good. She does that that's good. That's okay. That's good stuff. That's not particularly persuasive in my book because you can just choose who you want to make those statements. But she also has statements from people who knew both of them and who testified to Bryton's mental state being less stable than she presented to the court. In other words, some of the things she accused Ilma of this kind of erratic behavior, were things that other people had seen her exhibit as well. But I'm going to look at one declaration in particular because I think it pertains to this situation the most. When Manson's attorneys filed this declaration, one of the surprising things to the casual observer like me is that, hey, this defendant's sister is coming forward to make this declaration that supports the other side. Why would she do that? I mean, come on. That's got to be persuasive, as people said, that she had the bravery to stand up for the truth. Well, why would Bryton's alleged best friend make a declaration in favor of Ilma Gore? And here's what she says. That she met them in 2011 in Queensland, and she says in paragraph 1, I have considered Bryton as my best friend. Throughout the years, I observed the relationship and dynamics between the family. They're twin sisters. They cared for each other. They had similar interests in humor. They had disagreements, but nothing that warranted concern. But as things reached a little bit of a fever pitch between Ilma and Bryton, I think far more than her declaration from Warner would suggest. I mean, certainly her application for the TRO says this thing was completely off the rails. All kinds of crazy stuff going on. The best friend, or person who says they're the best friend of Bryton, says, Bryton asked me to straight up lie about Ashley's behavior and character in order to protect the children and herself. Bryton even requested me to lie over voice recordings. I did not engage in any false voice recordings for Bryton. I did not believe this would reach a point of court. After reading the restraining order complaints, I was even further shocked to see the allegations Bryton had made against Ashley. About the restraining order, Bryton said to me, you know how the court systems work. They won't do anything if there's not enough evidence. If it came down to it, you can lie about Ashley for me. At the point of Bryton asking me to lie for her, I ceased the friendship and have not spoken to her since. It's been devastating to witness how much destruction one person has caused in such a short amount of time to everyone, including myself. Bryton was my best friend. Now, I don't know the weight of that particular affidavit, but there were 8 other ones that supported Ilma Gore. None of us presumably know any of these people, so you don't know how to weight those. But the characteristics that gave Bryton's declaration so much weight on the front, that this was a sister, I think is mirrored in some of these declarations of friends of the family and friends of Bryton who spoke up and said this is too one-sided. This is not really what's happening here. Bryton's statements are not true, and I won't support them. I've seen other documents too that show or indicate that Bryton has been involved with conflicts with people back in Australia. Former employer, she had a situation over there involving potentially mental health. She blames that on her sister. I don't know the truth of the origin of that either. I can't say. What I can say, though, is this, is that it was easy to believe that Bryton's declaration should be believed on its face, that here are these plain set out facts, and it supports Manson's case. And many of those things still do. But what I am saying is you can't just look at it at face value. If Ilma Gore did do the things that Manson alleges, she's going to be held to account for that. But the truth is going to end up being more nuanced than that. It just is. From what I have seen, Ilma Gore and her sister Bryton had a pretty tough upbringing. There were some difficult family circumstances there. And the scars of that appear to be visible still on both of these sisters. It's terrible that they have this conflict now, and terrible that they have had a conflict. It is. They've both entered the arena in that Ilma got involved in the Phoenix Act, got involved in this movement to take down Manson for what he allegedly did. So she put herself in the arena, and now Bryton has stepped into this arena on behalf of Manson. And I don't think it was just an epiphany that one day she thought, I can't live with myself if I don't testify on behalf of Marilyn Manson against my sister. This is obviously more complicated than that. There is a contest of wills here and a contest of reality between these sisters. I don't know that either one of them has a 100% grasp on reality. Ilma describes herself as an artist, and maybe between what she wants to be and what is, she's going over the line sometimes. And maybe her sister's doing that too. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know them. It's uncomfortable, indicating and showing facts that show that the credibility of somebody who's come forward may not be all that it seems. I didn't really like it. I didn't like reading this stuff. But if you're going to take what she has said and put it out there against Manson, who is also a human being, and saying, well, there it is, it's her own sister, and she stood up for the truth, then unfortunately that has to be looked at. It just does. When women make accusations against men, it can be a different switching genders there, but that's the case here. These women have come forward against Manson. Due process requires that you assess the credibility of their allegations against this individual, whether it's one woman or whether it's several. You have to assess the credibility. And when witnesses come forward on his behalf to say that these women are wrong, that this was a conspiracy against him, you also have to assess their credibility. And if her declaration is especially credible because it's her sister, then it is especially important to know why this might have happened. And it might not have just been for the desire to see justice on behalf of Marilyn Manson. Does she really even know him? Is it perhaps more likely that this is another battle in the war that's going on with these sisters? So I think you're going to see, probably before the discovery hearings, that the defendants team may submit some more evidence on their side. They don't have to right now. It's not really the point of the anti-SLAPP motions for them to assemble a case against the plaintiff. The point of the anti-SLAPP is the plaintiff is supposed to have to do the work, and the defendants don't, and then the court will assess what the plaintiff does. So I can't say what they're going to do, but it's surely on their mind to consider fighting back against some of these allegations, and you're gonna see the credibility of Manson's witnesses attacked. That's just fair. Now, if this case gets past the anti-SLAPP, and I've previously said I think Manson has a strong case for it to do that, then these things become even more active because you're beyond the procedural bar, and now you begin to move more into the substance of, well, who has the greater weight of the evidence here? And you begin to do discovery and things like that. So more of this will become relevant later. But for now, I think it's incumbent on everybody to realize the attorneys are free to take shots right now because you're at this procedural posture that's early in the case. You can fire up these declarations. You can have them say what you want them to say. They're not being contested by depositions right now. They're not being cross-examined in court. So either side, what Manson has said so far, what the defendants have said so far, and what they're going to say at the motions hearing and the anti-SLAPP hearing, it's not up to the full measure of being contested by the other side yet. That comes later. And really think about it, in the Depp case, nobody got a good picture of what that case was about, really, until it went to trial. Until the attorneys and the witnesses could be put to the test to be against each other. Yeah, you believed one side or the other, and if it turned out the way that you think, then you just always knew that, and you're incredibly brilliant, that's for sure. But for the average person like me, you don't have that level of confidence until the other side gets to make their case, and people are put on the stand and put to the test by motivated people who will call them to account if they're wrong. This case may get there eventually if it doesn't settle. It just isn't there now. And so nobody's statements, and certainly nobody's attorney's statements, should be taken at face value. So that's After Hours this week. Thanks.